Hello friends, this is Silver from EggFeathers Homestead. If you haven't met me before, I am a mama to 8 wonderful people, a wife to Michael, the best husband in the world in my opinion. We are living on a small acreage in Iowa, just doing the homestead dream. Today I thought I'd bring you along and show you how I can chickpeas. Because we're a large family, we go through a lot of things, including hummus. My kids all love hummus, and if you have more than one child or even one child, you know that one thing is an absolute. They will not like everything you eat or everything that you cook. So hummus is the one thing that they can all agree on. I'm going to take you through the steps and I hope you enjoy. So the first thing that I did was last night I soaked about 10 cups of chickpeas. You can do it several different ways. The approved method from the National Center for Home Food Preservation and Ball Canning Book is to soak overnight and then cook for a half hour the next day and put in your jars hot after you've cooked for that half hour. I am putting this disclaimer out there right now. What I'm doing would be considered probably borderline rebel canning. I am not canning my beans dry. I am not boiling them for 30 minutes. I soak them, I bring them up to a boil and turn them off. I have found from doing different methods that if you boil that half hour, they tend to get really mushy and we just don't like them very much. But if you just bring them up to a boil and turn them off, it turns out really, really well. I have not tried doing it raw, but Heather over at the Needy Homesteader site has inspired me to try that. Today, I'm going to do it the way I normally do it though. So I'm going to turn the camera around so that you can see what's going on. So here my chickpeas are just about up to temperature. I'm going to grab my handy dandy ladle. I've been skimming a little bit of the foam off the top. It's not going to make or break anything, it just looks better. Now when I soaked these beans last night, I did pick through for any kind of rocks or anything like that. And today I drained off the rinsed water and I put fresh in a couple of times, and I did find some beans that were less than desirable. So this is almost ready to go. I have my All-American 930 canner. Absolutely adore this thing. This is like the best thing in the whole world. And I have about 3 inches of water in the bottom, and it's just on a slow heat to come up to temperature slowly while we're doing everything else. When you are using a canner, you always want to inspect your lid. So what I'm looking for, do I have an intact seal? Yes, I do. This is the emergency seal. Do I have clear holes? Okay, my gauge hole looks great. That's over here. And then I don't know if you can see, you need to see daylight through it. Make sure you don't have any food stuck in there. So that looks good. It's clean. I washed it up a little bit because it's been stored downstairs. I washed out the canner. Again, thanks to Heather. She has taught me so much about canning. I would love to meet her in person someday. I use just a thin film of Vaseline around where this seals, because it is a metal to metal seal. There are many different kinds of pressure canners. I have an old-fashioned jiggler canner without a gauge, and I also have this one which has a gauge and a jiggler. So when you're doing this, you choose one or the other. I normally go by the gauge, which according to National Centers for Home Food Preservation is 11 pounds for my elevation. Alrighty, and then I'm going to set this aside for a minute. I have my fermentation station in the background. This is where I'll put my pan, and then I have my funnel for filling the jars. I have my jar lifter, which is, it doesn't really have a good home at the moment. And then I have I could not find my canning tool. I was freaking out. I think Heather calls this a Pokey Joe. I just call it, I don't know, a pokey thing. It has, you can see a line scraped in it, so that's how I know how much water to put in my canner. It's marked at 3 inches. So use that to help debubble the food in the jar. Since I couldn't find it, I just got out my handy dandy chopstick, which would work just fine. And we're gonna say hi to Leif really quick. Say hi, Leif.
Hi.
Okay, Mommy's canning, so it's time to go in the living room, okay? I love you. Bye-bye. Next I use Himalayan pink salt. You don't have to add salt to the beans, but we really like to, so it's a teaspoon per quart. And that's how I can my jars, is just by the quart, because we'll use that to make a batch of hummus. I have vinegar here, which you use to wipe the seals, and then I have this old white kitchen towel that is just, it's outlived its usefulness. Sometimes I use it to strain milk, but today I'm using it to wipe jars. Then we have our lids. Now, Vol says you do not have to put boiling water on these. I am a creature of habit, so I actually have my boiling water kettle here, and I'm just going to cover these with boiling water. Again, you don't have to. I choose to. It's old school. I'm okay with that. And then I also have my metallic lid lifter, or my magnetic lid lifter. I'm sorry, my brain is jumbled today. As you can see from my background, we have been getting further in our renovation. Oh, it looks so yucky right now, but it's going to be wonderful. I'm excited because we found some wood underneath our lovely 1957 boomerang countertop. Ugh. So I'm excited about this. A little bit of sanding and it'll be beautiful. I also have a gauge that my husband let me borrow. This helps me make sure that I have just the right gap on the lid, which you'll see when I put the lid on later. It's important that the canner is facing so that you have the groove right here. This is where the lid is going to align. And then of course I have my weighted gauge. And again, where we're at, our elevation, we use 10 PSI for our weighted gauge. All right, I'm going to skim the foam off of this again, and then we'll get started filling jars. I have the jars in the dishwasher staying nice and hot. Ooh, there's the steam. And I also have my bands in there as well. So that's how I like to do it. So some people like to do all of their jars at once. I'm not confident in my speed, so I do one jar at a time. I'm going to grab a jar at a time out of the dishwasher. And here we go. So when I'm filling the jar, I'm going to fill it and leave a good bit of headspace. So the official headspace is 1 inch. I am more comfortable giving it a little bit more headspace, so kind of like at the top of the shoulder, than I am the inch, just to allow for some expansion. These beans have not boiled for 30 minutes, but I have found from past experience they have pretty much expanded as much as they are going to expand at this point. So I'm just going to pop them in here. A little bit more. Alrighty, and then we're gonna fill up the water to that 1 inch headspace. And if you hear noise in the background, my toddler is teething. He has been a little terrorist. He's pretty much harassing everybody. So if you hear noise, that's what that is. And I have a little bit more liquid in here than I would care to, so I'm just going to ladle off just a touch. Just a touch. I'm kind of weird about my headspace. I like it to be as close to perfect as possible. All right, so then I'm going to add my teaspoon of salt. I'm going to dip my cloth in vinegar and go around the rim of that jar, all around, just to make sure that it's nice and clean. I'm going to take my very clean finger. I'm going to run that around the rim of my jar to make sure I don't have any nicks, any cracks, anything like that. It feels good. So I'm going to grab one of my lids. I'm particular about things, so I like to align the writing on my lid with either the front or back of the jar. So today I'm aligning it with the pretty picture on the front. Then I put my finger on the top, screw it on just to finger tight, and grab that jar and put it in the canner. I'm just going to keep doing that with my other jars. And actually I'm going fast enough. I think I'm going to grab a couple of jars this time. I'm just going to keep filling up these jars, and I'll bring you back when it's time to close the canner. I forgot to mention that I do have one of these in the bottom of my canner, because if you don't do that, you can risk your jars breaking. Now right now I have 7 quart jars in the canner, and I'm going to place this up on top, and I think I'm going to can some pint jars just to have some smaller ones on hand. Kind of crazy for my house, but why not? So now I'm going to fill my pint jars, and I'm going to give you a note of caution here. So for a quart jar of beans, you run your pressure canner for 90 minutes. You do not run your canner for that long for pint jars, or even have a pint and a half jar here. However, that being said, you can put the two of them together. You have to run your canner at the length of time for the larger jars. So I will run the canner for 90 minutes or an hour and a half to accommodate the quart jars. I've done this before with no issues. It's always worked out just fine, but need to be aware that there are 2 different processing times for those different size jars. The pint and a half jar, it's right smack dab in the middle. Again, you would run that, if you were running pint and a half jars, you would run those for the time of a quart. Now, I also want to reiterate here, the method I am using is not approved by the Ball Book of Canning or Canning Preservation Center. This is just the method that I have found that works for me. Use at your own discretion. Do your own research. If you want to can these using the only approved method, then you can go to the National Centers for Home Food Preservation and follow the directions, which are pretty much exactly like this, except you boil those beans for half an hour before you put in jars. I'm just throwing that out there. There may be beginning canners watching, and I totally respect that. I know that when I first started out doing this, I followed instructions to the T. At this point, I'm comfortable just based on doing my own research that there is no harm in processing these beans the way that I am. There are a lot of people who like to process them dry. They don't even bother soaking them. They just put a smaller amount in the jar and it comes out beautifully. Like I said, I prefer to soak because I want to make sure I get any enzymes out of the beans that might cause gastric distress or prevent the beans' nutrients from being absorbed in any way. There are different schools of thought on how much pressure canning removes those enzymes just on its own, even if you use unsoaked beans. For me, it's just, it makes me comfortable. It makes me in my happy place to soak the beans, so that's what I do. I just know that if I cook them for that half hour, they turn to mush, especially when I'm doing a huge batch like this. They just tend to get really mushy before, well, they just get mushy before they even go in a jar. And it's yucky pooey, and we don't like that. So I'm adding half a teaspoon of salt to these. You don't have to add salt. I think during the process, I actually forgot to add salt to some of my jars. Whoops. It'll be all right. I'll add salt in the hummus. It's no big deal. All right, and then again, you debubble those jars just to make sure you don't want any jars cracking. I've had them crack a few times, and that's really my own fault. I thermal shocked them. I put too cool of foods in the jar, and then I put the jar into a hot canner, and it just was not happy. So now I'm being extra careful because I don't like losing jars, especially since we've been having such shortages. We are seeing them in all of our stores these days. It's awesome. In fact, today my husband went to our local hardware store and found wide mouth lids, which was so exciting. So I sent him a text and said, buy them, get them. So that really helps. I found a bunch of regular mouth lids, but the wide mouths have been in short supply. So I'm really happy to have some of those again. I really hope that we start to see more here at some point. And lesson learned, looky here. It's a mason jar. but the regular band doesn't fit on it, so I cannot use this. I will have to get a different jar to transfer those into. I'll do that in a minute after I get these other ones sealed. I guess I should check that first. I just assumed. You know what my grandpa said about assuming, but I probably shouldn't say that on YouTube. You know, there may be kids watching. But anyway, so I'm going to continue on with this. I'm going to go find a different jar for those other ones, and then I will be right back. Okay, I just decided to use a quart jar for this last one, and I'm going to add a little bit more salt to it. My beautiful and talented friend Heidi found me a really nice deal on regular mouth jars. So thank you so much, Heidi. I'm hoping to have her on the channel sometime soon because she is a canning guru, and I think you would enjoy learning some things from her. She's a pretty special gal. Alrighty, so now it is time to put on the lid. I've not tried this one-handed, so this might be kind of humorous. Bear with me and we'll try and get through this. All right, so on the canner, you can see it has these flanges here, and you want that to catch under here. So we put the lid on, and then we turn it until you see, oh, it could be a little persnickety. This canner is still relatively new. So we want the arrow to line up with the notch. Now, I like to turn the burner off at this point because I really don't dig burning my fingers. It's just not fun for me. So what our goal is at this point is we want to, oh my goodness, there's a toddler disagreement going on in the living room. I like to use my gauge, and the goal here is, I don't know if you can see, we want the gap to be the same all around the canner. Because this is a metal on metal canner, you don't want to have, I'm sorry for the wonky camera work here, I apologize. You don't want it to be too different. So I'm noticing it's just a tad off and it's gonna drive me nuts. So I'll just keep adjusting. And again, I love this little gauge because you can actually go boop and just adjust it. Take your time with this step. This is important. You want to make sure that you are even around this canner. There's no reason to rush this step. It is so much better to be safe than sorry. And I'm pretty comfortable with where that's at. So the way this works is you tighten up the nuts across from each other. Sorry, I gotta loosen that one up. You know what? I'm gonna get some help. Izzy, would you please hold this for me? Hold it just like this. Can you do that? My beautiful and lovely assistant, Elizabeth, who you met in a previous video, is helping me right now. So you want to adjust these until they're tight, but not like, don't crank them down, like don't go crazy. Just, we want to tighten them down firmly, but not crazy. Okay, so I feel like good and tight. You can turn that heat back on. And what we're going to do at this point is we are going to let this come up to a boil. We're going to vent steam out of the petcock, and we want to do that for 10 minutes before we put on the weighted gauge. Now we do this because we want to make sure that all of the air is out of this canner and is completely vented before we start our timing on the cooking. So I will bring you back when we have a steady stream of steam. We will let that stream go for 10 minutes, and at that point we will put on our weighted gauge, and then we will wait for this to come up to pressure, which is going to be 11 pounds, and then we start our time, our 90-minute processing time. We do not start our time until then. So when it's venting steam and we're coming up to pressure, that is not a part of that 90-minute processing time. So I'll bring you back in a few minutes to see what I'm talking about. I did it again. I do it almost every time. I forget to add the vinegar. So the white vinegar that I use to wipe the rims, I generally just pour it right into the canner afterwards because we have super hard water here. And if we don't do that, then the jars are gonna have an ugly white film of lime scale. So I know now when the jars come out and they cool off and I'm getting ready to put them away, I will be wiping them down with pure vinegar to get off said white film. So don't be like me. Remember to pour your vinegar into the canner. And I'm going to show you how the steam's coming out. Okay, now you can see we have a pretty steady stream of steam. Say that 3 times fast. And now I'm going to set a 10-minute timer and let this vent out all the way. Okay, so our canner has vented for 10 minutes, and sorry for this shaky. I need to get a tripod. If any of you know where I can find one, please let me know. Okay, so this part I never like. I don't know why, I just don't. But we're gonna put the gauge with the 10, because again, we're at 10 pounds. I'm gonna put it onto the petcock. And I don't know why, for some reason this always makes me jumpy, but here we go. I did it, yay. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna wait for the gauge to come up to, it's gonna be 11 PSI. It's already, you can see it already started building pressure, even just venting like it was. And when it hits that 10 to 11 mark, we'll also have the jiggler going as well. So I'll bring you back when we're up to pressure and we'll start our timer. Here we go. We are up to pressure. We are showing 11 pounds. And our jiggler is going. Now, if we were relying on the jiggler only, we would look for 1 to 4 jiggles per minute. Right now, we are following the gauge, so we want that gauge to stay at or around 11 psi. On my particular stove, this is kind of a beast, so some of these burners will get very, very hot. When you're adjusting this, I wouldn't want to leave it at this temperature because it's going to go too high on pressure. So I want to adjust it down slowly. I know for my particular stove, I'm probably going to end up having it about here. But again, you want to make those adjustments slowly. And if at any time during this process your pressure drops below whatever it is for your altitude, you actually have to start your timer all over again. So it is important to adjust slowly to make sure that your heat does not drop too much, so that you do not have to start that timer all over again. So we're going to let this go for 90 minutes. And at that point, we will turn the heat off and we will let this drop down to 0, all the way down to 0. This will take, it takes about an hour on mine. You do not want to mess with it. You don't want to tap the jiggler to make the pressure release faster. You just want to let the canner come down off of pressure on its own naturally. So when we get to 0, I will bring you back and we will open the canner and see what we've got. And we're back finally. The canner is down to 0, so I'm going to pull off the gauge, and it is actually kind of warm, so I'm going to grab a towel to do this. You hear that hiss? Even though the gauge says 0, we're actually going to let it vent out all the way for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and take the lid off. Go. Oh, okay, now we're back, and our pressure has come all the way down. So now it's time to open up. You open it the way you close it, opposite wing nuts, and then you turn, and you always open the lid away from you so that the steam does not hit you in the face, because it is not much fun. And now it's time for the reveal. Look at that. Oh, those are gorgeous. They're still bubbling in the jar. They're super, super hot, but they came out just right. So far, I don't see any siphoning issues with any of them. That's when the liquid comes out of the jar because you've had a difference in pressure, or your jars are too full, or any number of things. So we'll see if we're as lucky with the bottom. And by the way, you probably shouldn't grab that with your bare hand, but I'm a baker. I'm used to a lot of heat. But don't do that at home, unless you're silly like me. All right. Now we're going to let these sit for about 18 to 24 hours. We're not going to mess with them, poke them, play with them in any way. We're going to give them some space. and hope that we get good seals. So tomorrow we will come back when these are completely cooled off, and I will show you how you clean them up and get them ready for storage. Have a great night. Here we are. It is the next day. All of my jars have sealed. I have tested all of them. All the buttons are down on all of them. Some of them did have that lime scale buildup, and so I just took my towel with vinegar on it, pure vinegar, wiped them down. I also washed these with soapy water. I want them to go into storage really clean. You can see I lost a little bit of liquid siphoning, just a little bit on some of these. It doesn't change the safety of them at all. I will use these ones with a little bit less liquid first though, but you can see that they did expand a little bit, not very much, but a little bit. So that's also why I had that ample headspace, just in case that were to happen. So now what I'll do is I will just write what they are on the top. They will go into our food rotation, and well, these aren't gonna last very long. These are pretty much gone already. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.